Clara pressed her palm gently against the client's back, letting her fingertips glide in slow, soothing strokes designed to ease tension and bring comfort. She had perfected this technique over time, ensuring each movement provided relief. This job was all she had, her only means of survival. But even then, it barely covered her expenses, let alone the medical bills piling up for her ailing Aunt Alara. Sometimes, she couldn't help but feel a pang of envy toward her coworkers. Many of them walked away at the end of their shifts with pockets full of cash, their earnings far surpassing hers. It wasn't that she resented them, but rather, she resented her own helplessness. With a quiet sigh, she finished the massage, stepping back as the client sat up, stretching with a satisfied smile. He slipped her a tip before leaving, and Clara accepted it with a grateful nod, silently hoping he would return. As she retreated to the staff area, she spotted Rachel lounging on the worn-out couch, looking as carefree as ever. The two of them were on break, a rare moment of stillness between clients. Rachel chuckled, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "Wow, that extra service of mine was great," she mused, more to herself than to Clara. Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the towel in her lap. "Extra service?" she repeated, her voice laced with curiosity. Rachel was one of the more successful massage therapists at the parlor. She was always cheerful, always had a pocket full of tips, and never seemed to worry about money the way Clara did. Clara had wondered about it before, but had never dared to ask outright. With a knowing smirk, Rachel leaned in, lowering her voice. "You know, aside from the massage," she whispered, her eyes glinting mischievously, "a little extra attention. A kiss here, a touch there, a bit of heat, or something more, for the right price." Clara's breath hitched, a cold sensation prickling down her spine as the weight of Rachel's words sank in. She understood immediately. "You actually do that?" Clara asked, barely above a whisper. Rachel arched a brow, unfazed. "Of course. Got a problem with it?" Clara didn't answer. Rachel sighed, shaking her head with amusement. "Listen, sweetheart, if you need money and just sit around waiting for things to change, nothing's going to happen. These rich men will throw thousands at you for something that makes them feel good. They don't even hesitate." She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And besides, nobody's stopping you here. Each session is just you and the client. What happens inside the room stays there." Clara's stomach twisted into knots. Rachel leaned back, scanning Clara with an appraising look. "Why don't you try it?" she suggested casually. "You're beautiful. There's no reason to be shy. You think I'm the only one doing this? Almost everyone here is, and you're probably the only one who hasn't caught on." Clara swallowed hard, her mind spinning. She wanted to reject the idea immediately, but then she thought about Aunt Alara, her frail body, the dialysis sessions, the endless medical expenses that Clara couldn't afford. She had no one else, no other options. She finally understood why women like Rachel made the choices they did, and now Clara had to decide. When Clara arrived home, the first thing she did was place the small paper bag of expensive medication on the table. That day's wages had been just enough to buy her aunt's medicine and put food on the table. Nothing more. The weight of their financial struggle never left her, but at least for now, Aunt Alara would have what she needed. She found her aunt sitting stiffly in the dimly lit living room, her hands gripping the armrests of the worn-out chair. Even from across the room, Clara could tell she was in pain. Her breathing was shallow, her lips pale. Clara rushed forward, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulders. "Where does it hurt?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Aunt Alara shook her head weakly, forcing a smile that did little to mask the discomfort in her eyes. "I'm okay, Clara, don't worry." Clara frowned. "No, Aunt Alara, I will worry," she insisted, wrapping an arm around her frail frame to help her up. "Come, let's go to your room. I have your medicine here, the one the doctor prescribed." As Clara guided her toward the bedroom, Aunt Alara sighed, leaning against her. "You know," she murmured, "your life won't move forward if you keep making me your priority. You could have spent that money on something for yourself or saved it for college." Clara pretended not to hear, refusing to acknowledge the words. Instead, she gently helped her onto the bed before stepping out to fetch a glass of water. When she returned, her aunt had already lain down, her eyes fluttering closed from exhaustion. Clara sat at the edge of the bed, watching her for a moment before speaking in a soft but firm voice. "Auntie Lara, please, have mercy on me." Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass. "I choose to endure hardship because I want you to keep living." Auntie Lara opened her eyes, blinking away the moisture that had gathered. She reached for Clara's hand, squeezing it weakly. The unspoken gratitude in her gaze made Clara's chest tighten. She couldn't let her cry. If she did, Clara knew she wouldn't be able to hold back her own tears. Auntie Lara had done so much for her, even when she had no obligation to. She had taken Clara in when no one else would, sheltering her, loving her as if she were her own. Yet, despite that kindness, her relatives had never accepted Clara, treating her as an outsider, a burden. And now that Auntie Lara was sick, those same people had vanished. The ones who had once clung to her generosity now whispered about karma, blaming her illness on the choice to take Clara in. It made Clara sick with anger. She had learned a harsh truth from them. Some people only stayed as long as you had something to offer. The moment you lost everything, they disappeared. But no matter what happened, Clara wouldn't leave Auntie Lara. "Lie down and rest," she whispered, brushing a few strands of hair from her aunt's forehead. "Don't worry about me." She forced a small smile and handed her the medicine, waiting patiently as her aunt swallowed the pills. Then, leaning down, she pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead before quietly slipping out of the room. As soon as she closed the door behind her, Clara let out a shaky breath. A single tear escaped and she wiped it away quickly. There was no time to be weak. Her shift started at 6 p.m., the time when the clients flooded in. Tonight, however, something felt different. The air was charged with an unusual energy, and the staff moved with extra urgency. It wasn't long before she realized why. The boss was here. It was rare for the woman to be on site unless something important was happening. She stood in the middle of the room, her sharp gaze sweeping over them with the air of someone about to issue an order. "Do a good job with your services," she instructed, her tone clipped but expectant. The staff gathered, waiting. "Our reputation depends on it," the boss continued. "Some wealthy young men will be coming in tonight for massages. They're billionaires, single, so pay attention and make sure they enjoy themselves." She let the words linger, her meaning clear. "Understood?" Rachel's eyes gleamed with excitement. She flashed her signature grin and gave a playful salute. "Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure they leave with a smile," she chimed. Clara swallowed. The air boss seemed satisfied, clasping her hands together. "They'll be here soon," she announced. "Each of you will be assigned to one of them." Then, with a final glance around the room, she turned and walked off. Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wasn't sure why, but something about tonight unsettled her. Clara's co-workers had begun whispering excitedly among themselves, their voices hushed but filled with anticipation. Some stood before the mirrors, fixing their hair, reapplying lipstick, making sure their uniforms clung to their curves just right. It was clear they were preparing for more than just routine massages tonight. Rachel sauntered over, her smirk as playful as ever. "You should do what they do," she said, patting Clara's shoulder. "Might solve your money problem." Then, without waiting for a reply, she walked off, her hips swaying with confidence. Clara exhaled slowly. She had already made up her mind she wouldn't offer anything beyond what was expected of her. No matter how tempting the money was, she couldn't bring herself to cross that line. She gathered her massage oils and clean towels, then positioned herself near the entrance, waiting. When the 5 young men arrived, the shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The air grew heavier, tinged with the scent of expensive colognes and the subtle but unmistakable eagerness of her coworkers. Clara watched as her boss practically beamed while greeting them, her usual stern demeanor replaced with a warmth she reserved only for the wealthiest clients. Clara, however, kept to herself. She quietly retreated to her assigned room, setting everything in place. A silent prayer formed in her mind. She hoped, at the very least, that whoever she was paired with would be generous with their tip. The door suddenly swung open, and Clara's heart jumped. Her boss stepped inside, accompanied by a tall man. "Clara, your client is here," her boss announced. "Make sure to satisfy him with your service, okay?" Clara nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As the boss stepped out, the man entered fully, and Clara felt her breath catch. There was something about him. Something commanding, effortless. He was strikingly handsome, his sun-kissed skin complemented by a crisp, expensive suit. Even from a distance, she could catch the subtle notes of his cologne. clean, woodsy, and utterly intoxicating. As soon as the door shut, Clara instinctively took a step back to create space. "This way, sir," she said, keeping her tone professional. "Please remove your shirt and lie down on the massage bed." He held her gaze for a brief moment before complying, unbuttoning his shirt with practiced ease. Clara turned away to give him privacy, focusing instead on preparing her hands with oil. But as she approached the table, she felt an odd sense of unease. It wasn't fear, just an awareness. Of him? She took a deep breath, pushing the feeling aside. When she placed her hands on his back and began working her fingers into the firm muscles, a jolt ran through her. Heat bloomed beneath her fingertips, and she had no idea why. She'd massaged countless clients before, but something about this man's presence made her heart race. A low groan escaped his lips as she kneaded a particularly tense spot. "So good," he murmured. Clara swallowed hard and forced herself to focus. She moved with practiced precision, careful and methodical, until finally the session came to an end. She wiped her hands, packed her supplies, and prepared to leave. But just as she reached for the door, his voice stopped her. "I thought there were other services here," he mused. Clara turned to face him, her pulse quickening. "Excuse me?" He arched a brow, sitting up on the table. "I heard rumors about this place," he said. "I was expecting more," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There are extra services, sir," she admitted quietly. "But not from me, perhaps one of the other therapists." "How about you?" he interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "I'll pay." Her breath hitched. He stood, moving toward his bag. When he returned, he pulled out a neat stack of crisp bills and placed them on the side table. "That will be my payment," he said simply. "Now, give me my kiss." Clara stiffened as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs as his hand brushed against her arm, urging her forward. "Are you going to take the money or not?" Her mind screamed at her to refuse, but then she thought of Aunt Alara. Her frail body, the way she clutched at her sides in pain. Would she even get a tip if she said no? It was just a kiss. He wouldn't be coming back. With trembling fingers, Clara reached for his shoulders, rising onto her toes. She pressed a quick kiss to his lips, intending for it to be brief, but before she could pull away, his hand slipped behind her neck, holding her in place. Her breath hitched as his lips moved against hers, firm yet unbearably smooth. The sudden glide of his tongue into her mouth sent a sharp shiver down her spine, her legs growing weak beneath her. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping his shirt as dizziness took hold of her senses. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. When she opened her eyes, he was smirking. "Nice service," he murmured, stepping back. Clara watched, dazed, as he gathered his things, dressed, and left without another word. The moment the door clicked shut, she sank onto the nearest chair, her mind spinning. What had she just done? Her gaze slowly drifted to the stack of money he had left behind. With trembling fingers, she reached for it. When she counted, her breath caught in her throat. $20,000? She whispered in disbelief. Her shock propelled her into action. Without thinking, she rushed out of the room, scanning the hallways in hopes of finding him, but he was already gone. "Nice job, girls," their boss called out, striding in with a satisfied grin. "Our guests loved all your services." Clara turned just in time to see Rachel sauntering over, looking particularly pleased with herself. A glistening mark on her neck, one that hadn't been there earlier, caught Clara's attention, and she quickly averted her gaze. She exhaled, pressing a hand to her chest, still struggling to process everything. She didn't even know his name. And no matter how much she tried not to dwell on what had just happened, she now had enough money to buy Aunt Alara's medicine. Whenever Aunt Alara asked where Clara got the money, she always found a way to offer a believable excuse. A delayed salary, a loan from a friend, a lucky tip from a generous client. But in reality, the truth sat heavy in her chest. Clara's heart pounded as Zach laced his fingers with hers, his grip firm yet oddly gentle. "These hands," he murmured, tracing her palm with his thumb, "should only be touching me." She didn't even know how she agreed. She only knew that when she looked down at the crisp bills on the side table, $50,000. Her fingers trembled as she picked them up, and she nodded. Yet that night, nothing happened, not in the way she expected. Zach didn't touch her in any intimate way. He simply asked her questions, And she answered. All the while, her thoughts remained anchored to Aunt Alara, the treatments, the hospital bills, the slow decline of the only person who had ever given her a home. She learned his name, Zach Anderson. 27.A, a businessman. She understood what he wanted from her, and in return he made an offer. One that changed everything. He would pay for Aunt Alara's hospital stay, cover the kidney surgery, every expense, every medication, every doctor's appointment. All in exchange for Clara. Oh! A strangled cry tore from her lips as Zach thrust into her from behind, her fingers gripping the bed's headboard. Her knees sank into the plush mattress, her body trembling under the weight of their arrangement. His hands gripped her waist, firm and possessive, his movements deep and unrelenting. This had become her life. She had quit her other jobs weeks ago. Zach had made her his exclusive therapist. But sometimes after a session like this, Clara wanted to push him away, not because she hated it, but because it was complicated. Because the longer this went on, the more tangled she became. Once they were done, Zach would lie beside her, the warmth of his skin lingering against hers, and inevitably, he would ask the same question. How's your aunt? Clara would sit up, pulling the sheets over herself, curling her knees to her chest. She's okay, she would whisper. Her operation is close now. There's a donor. Sometimes, when he stretched, she would move closer, instinctively pressing her hands against his back to ease the tension in his muscles. Zach would glance at her, eyebrow raised. Again? She would blush. Not that. I just wanted to massage you. A slow sigh would escape him, but he'd let her. And as Clara worked her fingers over his shoulders, she would murmur, Zach, thank you. He would ask, for what? For helping Aunt Alara, she'd say. Without you, she wouldn't have gotten a new kidney. I would have lost her. Zach would scoff. That wasn't help. You worked for it, Clara. You gave yourself to me. That's not help. She would look down, fingers stilling over his skin. I know, she'd say, but I still want to thank you. My aunt means everything to me. 2 months into their arrangement, Clara realized something terrifying. She had fallen for him. She never said it aloud, never let the words slip past her lips, because she knew what this was to him. Zach only wanted her body, and she didn't want to be the fool who wished for more. When Aunt Alara's surgery came, it was a success. Clara sat beside her in the hospital room, gripping her frail hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight in her chest begin to lift. Aunt Alara had been given a second chance at life, but Clara wasn't sure if she had given away her own in the process. Clara thanked God, and of course, Zach. She wanted to thank him in person, but he was out of the country for a month on business. Rather than disturb him, she decided to wait until he returned and had free time. With Aunt Alara still recovering in the hospital, Clara used some of the remaining funds to buy her new clothes. Things she had never been able to afford before, but in the middle of shopping, a sharp tug on her hair made her stumble. She gasped, the clothes slipping from her hands. "Ow!" Clara cried out. Onlookers turned, their whispers growing louder. Before she could react, the grip on her hair tightened, followed by a stinging slap across her cheek. Tears welled in her eyes from the pain. Blinking, Clara looked up to see a stunning young woman, furious, breathing hard. A second later, an older lady rushed in, grabbing the enraged girl by the arms, trying to restrain her. "Who are you? Why did you do that?" Clara stammered, her voice trembling. "Did I do something wrong?" "You did," the woman screamed, still struggling against the older lady's grip. A security guard stepped in, keeping a firm hand between them. "You're William's mistress. That's why our wedding can't move forward." Clara's breath hitched. Her jaw fell open. "Ha!" The older woman, who had just moments ago been trying to calm things down, shot Clara a cold glare. William's mother. Clara's world tilted. William had told her he was single, that there was nobody else. He had looked her in the eyes and promised the engagement, his fiancée. It had all been a lie. She tried to defend herself, but before she could, the woman broke free from her mother's grip and clawed at Clara's arm, nails raking down her foot. Pain flared as blood beaded along the scratches. The guards pulled the woman away while Clara, trembling, turned and fled. She ran into the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and burst into tears. She had believed him, trusted him, and even though she knew she had no right to feel this way, after all they had never labeled what they had, her heart still ached. The truth was, she had fallen for him. And now she realized she had never truly belonged to him. Clara ignored William's calls and texts at the hospital. She forced herself to smile for Aunt Alara, who was overjoyed about her recovery. Clara told herself she had no right to be angry. He paid me. I was just a body to him. Even so, her chest tightened whenever she thought about it. Early one morning, Clara woke with a start, her stomach twisting violently. She barely made it to the bathroom before she threw up. Tears pricked her eyes as she clutched the sink, her breaths uneven. She heard hurried footsteps behind her. "Clara?" Aunt Alara's voice was laced with worry. "Why are you throwing up?" Clara wiped her mouth and shook her head. "It's nothing. I must have eaten something bad." Aunt Alara's eyes narrowed. "Are you pregnant?" Clara froze. "You are, aren't you?" Aunt Alara pressed, grabbing her shoulders. "Do you have a boyfriend? Or—" "I'm not pregnant," Clara cut in, forcing a laugh. "Why would I be pregnant? I don't have a boyfriend." Before Aunt Alara could say more, Clara turned away, hurrying to the kitchen. She tried to convince herself it was just food poisoning, but deep down, a terrifying possibility clawed at her mind. What if— That night, Clara bought a pregnancy test, and when she saw the result, her hands trembled. Police, her mind raced. She had to tell William. She called him, but he didn't answer. Hours later, around 9 p.m., a text finally arrived. "Come here. I miss you." Her heartbeat quickened. He'd be happy. Maybe he'd be supportive. Aunt Alara was asleep, so Clara slipped out without telling her. She took the elevator up to William's unit, a mixture of fear and anticipation twisting in her gut. She let herself in with the spare key he'd given her. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes landed on his luggage. Just returned from his trip, Clara stepped toward his bedroom door, raising her hand to knock, when it suddenly swung open. A woman stepped out. Her hair was tousled, her skin flushed, and she wore nothing but the faint glow of satisfaction. Clara froze. The woman's eyes flicked to her, recognition dawning before her lips curled into a scowl. "I knew it," she said icily, crossing her arms. "You're that woman." Her voice dripped with disdain, as if Clara were something filthy beneath her shoe. Clara's throat tightened. "Where's William?" she asked, barely keeping her voice steady. "He told me to come." The woman flipped her hair over her shoulder. "He's asleep." Her smirk deepened. "We weren't exactly done before you showed up." A wave of nausea rolled over Clara. "He asked me to come," she repeated, her voice thinner this time. "I have something important to tell him." The woman's expression hardened. "You have no right to be here." Before Clara could react, the woman grabbed her by the hair and yanked her forward. Pain shot through her scalp, but she didn't fight back. Because the woman was right. William wasn't hers. He never was. "I told you, leave," the woman hissed, shoving Clara back. Clara staggered, her vision blurred. The woman's gaze flickered to the key in Clara's trembling hand. With a sneer, she snatched it. "This is mine now," she said. "Get out, if you don't want your life ruined. William is mine, and we're getting married." The door slammed in Clara's face. Silence, then the vibration of her phone. A text from William. "I'm sorry, I'm getting married to Isabella. Let's stop this, Clara." Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled around her phone, knuckles white. The weight of everything crashed down on her. She stumbled into the elevator, ran out of the building. The cold night air stung her skin, but nothing compared to the ache hollowing out her chest. She kept telling herself she had no right to be hurt, but the pain didn't care. It crushed her anyway. They had never been in a real relationship. This was just a transaction, an exchange so she could save Aunt Alara. Yet, her heart still ached. As Clara returned home, she spotted Aunt Alara outside, worry etched across her face. The moment she saw her, something inside Clara broke. She ran straight into her aunt's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm pregnant, Aunt Alara," Clara choked out between cries. "Let's leave this place. I can't take it anymore." Aunt Alara pulled her close, whispering soothing words, running her hands gently over Clara's back. All right, sweetheart, let's go. Don't cry. You're pregnant. Clara clung to her, her body trembling. Yes, and William's getting married. Her voice wavered. There's nothing for me here. Aunt Alara's arms tightened around her. Then we'll leave, I promise. Meanwhile, William woke with a pounding headache. The Singapore flight had been brutal, but he'd come back earlier than planned. Clara had stopped answering his calls. That worried him. Knee-treading, he ran a hand through his hair and made his way toward the bedroom door, expecting, hoping to find Clara cooking in the kitchen like she always did. He had even bought a ring in Singapore. He couldn't explain it, but somewhere along the way something had shifted. Clara was no longer just a fleeting indulgence. He wanted her, all of her. But as he stepped into the kitchen, his breath hitched. Standing there, turning off the stove, was Isabella, wearing nothing but lingerie. His jaw clenched. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, dangerous. She turned, flashing a teasing smile, walking toward him with deliberate steps. "I'm here because you're my fiancé, William." His stomach twisted. How did she get in? Without another word, he stormed to the bedroom, reaching for his phone. Isabella trailed after him. "Why won't you marry me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "It's what your parents want." He ignored her. His fingers flew over his phone screen. Then his heart stopped. Missed calls from Clara, and then, William saw it, a message, one he never sent. His blood ran cold as he spun around, eyes blazing. "Who sent this text?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "I didn't send it." Isabella, now pale, took a step back. "I did." A heavy silence filled the room. "I just wanted that woman out of your life," she admitted, voice trembling. William's rage ignited like wildfire. "You messed with my phone?" "Yes, because I know you," she shot back, her voice rising. "You won't take responsibility for that girl in the end. You'll do what your parents say anyway." His grip tightened. Without thinking, he hurled his phone at the wall, watching it shatter into pieces. "William," Isabella shrieked, but he wasn't listening. His chest rose and fell heavily. "Don't think for a second that I'll just marry you because my parents say so," he spat. "You're delusional if you think they control my life." With that, he grabbed his car keys and stormed out, his mind racing. He had to find Clara. Meanwhile, Clara sat by the train window, watching the scenery blur past. She had spent the morning packing. Her mind was made up. She was leaving behind the pain, the memories, him, whatever she had with William. It wasn't real, was it? Would things have been different if they had talked? Her hand instinctively rested on her stomach, fear and uncertainty twisting inside her. Back in Clara's neighborhood, William parked his car abruptly, stepping out, his heart pounding, eyes turned toward him. The whisper started immediately. "Clara?" he called, standing outside her house. No answer. An older woman stepped forward, curiosity in her gaze. "Young man, who are you looking for? Are you Clara's boyfriend?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'm her boyfriend." The woman smiled, but then her expression shifted. "Oh, dear." His stomach clenched. "What?" "Clara left with her aunt this morning," she said gently. The ground beneath him seemed to shift. "She left?" he repeated, his voice hoarse. "Where did they go?" The woman shook her head. "We don't know. But they had a lot of bags. It looked like they might not come back." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. She was gone. William wanted to curse out loud. His grip tightened around his phone as he redialed Clara's number, but once again, the call failed to go through. His frustration surged like a tidal wave, crashing against the walls of his patience. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, dragging a hand through his already disheveled hair. The weight of regret settled heavily on his chest. How could she just vanish like that? Unable to contain his anger, he slammed his palm against the hood of his car, the sharp sound echoing in the quiet street. His jaw clenched. He refused to accept this. He refused to lose her. "I'll find you, Clara," he vowed through gritted teeth. "You'll come back to me. You have to." 7 years passed. 7 long, difficult years where Clara had fought through every struggle life threw her way. Yet, despite the hardships, she never once regretted her decision to leave, because in return, She had gained the two most precious souls in her life, her children. Yes, 7 years had gone by since she left that place, never once looking back. She had wanted peace, a fresh start, far away from a past that could no longer haunt her. And surely by now William had moved on. He was probably married, maybe even a father himself. But no matter how hard she tried to erase him from her heart, it was impossible, because every time she looked at her son and daughter, twins with the same piercing eyes and familiar features as him, she was reminded of the man she once loved, the man she could never forget. Clara had built a new life for herself. She now worked as a licensed massage therapist at a nearby resort, a profession that allowed her to support her family with dignity. Unlike before, this job was entirely legal and respectable, and she was proud of the stability she had created for her children. She worked the night shift so she could be there for them during the day, ensuring they never felt neglected. That morning, as the soft golden light of dawn filtered through the kitchen window, Clara stood at the counter, stirring warm milk for her children. The scent of toasted bread filled the small yet cozy home she had built from scratch. A sudden commotion from the living room made her pause. "Give me my egg, it's mine. Why are you grabbing it? You already have one." Clara sighed, shaking her head as she recognized the familiar voices of her twins, Lucy and Damien. "Clara," Lucy called out, her little voice filled with frustration. "Give that to Damien. I'll just make another one." Clara walked over to where her children were seated at the table. Both of them had boiled eggs on their plates, yet they were still bickering over one. Lucy's brows were furrowed in irritation, while Damien clutched the egg like it was the last treasure on earth. With an exasperated yet fond sigh, Clara knelt down to their level. "Enough, both of you," she said firmly, though her tone remained gentle. "You have school soon, and I'm dropping you off, so finish your breakfast without fighting." Damien pouted but nodded. After a moment of hesitation, he looked up at his mother with bright, hopeful eyes. "Mom," he began, his voice laced with excitement, "can we go somewhere fun next time? And can I get a Spider-Man pencil case? Mine's falling apart." Clara chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. "We'll see," she said, smiling as she took in the sight of her children. Her world. She had lost everything once, but now she had them, and that was more than enough. Lucy's eyes lit up with excitement. "Me too, Mom! I want a new dress and some pretty hair clips so I can look nice at school," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. Clara chuckled, shaking her head in amusement. "All right, but only if you both do really well on your exams. If you get good grades, I'll buy them for you. We can even go out and celebrate." "Really, Mom?" the twins shouted in unison, their little faces beaming with joy, as if the promise of new things gave them superpowers. They immediately focused on finishing their breakfast, stuffing bites of food into their mouths at an impressive speed. Clara could only smile at their enthusiasm, then turned back to prepare their lunch bags, carefully packing their favorite snacks. A short while later, she took them to school, accompanied by Aunt Elora, who had insisted on tagging along. "I want to see my little angels in their classroom," she had said, waving off Clara's half-hearted protests. The twins were in first grade, and though they were small, they were full of boundless energy. Clara had already been summoned to the school once because Lucy had been a little too rough with other kids. It wasn't because she was a troublemaker, no. Lucy simply had a fierce protective streak when it came to Damien. Whenever she thought her brother was in trouble, she didn't hesitate to step in. Meanwhile, Damien was gentler, more reserved, the type to solve problems with words rather than actions. Before they entered the school gates, Clara crouched down and cupped each child's face. "Remember, be good today, okay?" They nodded eagerly and she kissed them both on the forehead. "Aunt Alara," she said, turning to her aunt, "please text me if there's any problem, all right? I need to get to the resort. Some important guests are arriving and they want me there." "Go on, dear. I'll take care of the kids," Aunt Alara assured her. Clara lingered for a moment, watching as the twins disappeared into their classrooms. Only after they were out of sight did she finally turn away, feeling a bit more at ease as she left for work. By the time Clara arrived at the resort, the place was already bustling with activity. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the hum of conversation from guests enjoying their morning by the pool. The air smelled of salt and fresh flowers, a scent that had become familiar to her over the years. She spotted a coworker, Julian, standing near the reception area, rubbing his eyes as he stifled a yawn. "Julian," Clara called out with a smile, "you're on shift too?" Julian stretched his arms above his head and sighed. Yeah, barely keeping my eyes open though. I'm not used to working both daytime and nighttime shifts. But I heard there are a lot of guests today, so maybe that means more tips? Clara chuckled. That's the spirit. She quickly headed to the spa area and got to work. It didn't take long before a married couple arrived, requesting a massage. Clara attended to them with practiced ease, her hands expertly easing away their stress. When they left, they handed her a generous tip along with words of gratitude. Moments like these made all the exhaustion worth it. She loved her job, even when it drained her energy. The satisfaction of helping people relax and hearing their appreciation always made her fatigue melt away. As the day stretched on, the number of guests continued to grow. Late in the afternoon, Clara was preparing for her next client when she heard footsteps approaching. She straightened up, smoothing her uniform, and looked up with a polite smile. "Sir, may I?" Her words died on her lips. The man standing before her made her entire world come to a screeching halt. Her heart lurched, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. It was him, William. She couldn't finish her sentence. The moment her gaze locked onto his, the air seemed to thin, stealing her breath away. A wave of cold dread washed over her, paralyzing her in place. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, yet now that it was happening, she found herself utterly unprepared. "Miss Clara," he said, his voice low, controlled, but there was something simmering beneath the surface. His jaw clenched slightly, his sharp features unreadable. "Nice to see you again." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. She needed to stay professional. She cleared her throat, dropping her gaze as if looking at him too long would burn her. "Shall we begin?" she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. She stepped forward and placed her hands on his shoulders, starting the massage. But the moment her palms met his skin, her breath hitched, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. 7 years. 7 years of silence. 7 years convincing herself she had moved on. Yet here they were, as if time had collapsed in on itself, dragging her back into a past she had fought so hard to escape. She worked mechanically, focusing on the motions, on the pressure points, on anything but the way his muscles tensed under her touch. He had changed. His frame was broader, his presence heavier, commanding the space around him without effort. He must have been one of the VIP guests staying at the resort for the event. By the time she finished, her hands ached, though she wasn't sure if it was from the massage or from the way she had clenched them to keep herself steady. She took a step back, inhaling deeply before adopting a professional tone. "All done, sir." She hoped, prayed, that this would be the last time she had to see him. The tension in the room was suffocating, her carefully built walls threatening to crumble, but just as she was about to turn away, his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Where's your extra service?" Clara froze, her breath stilled, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Slowly, she turned to face him, disbelief flashing in her eyes. He held her gaze, unwavering. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and placed a thick wad of bills on the small table beside him. The sight of the money sent a shiver down her spine. Déjà vu. For a moment, the memories threatened to consume her. The old arrangement, the stolen moments, the shame, the longing. But she was not that woman anymore. Summoning every ounce of strength, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze head-on. "There's no extra service here, sir," she said, her voice firm, her dignity intact. She turned to leave, desperate to put as much distance between them as possible, but his next words stopped her cold. "Why did you leave 7 years ago?" A sharp pain stabbed through her chest, threatening to undo her. She hesitated before turning back, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. His gaze was intense, piercing through her defenses like he was searching for something, an answer, a confession, maybe even an apology. She exhaled shakily. "You know why, sir," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with something fragile. "Because it was only ever about my aunt's treatment in exchange for my service to you." A bitter smile touched her lips. "And besides," she continued, her eyes darkening, "you had a fiancé back then. I didn't want that kind of trouble." The words hung between them like a final goodbye. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, ignoring the way her heart twisted in her chest. She refused to look back. That wasn't the last time she saw him. For from it every evening of her shift, William showed up. Without fail, if she passed the resort's restaurant, she'd catch glimpses of him sitting alone, nursing a drink, eyes unreadable. She wondered why his wife wasn't with him, but she quickly shoved the thought away, forcing herself to focus on work. It was impossible, though. Night after night, he booked her, specifically her. And no matter how much she wanted to refuse, she had no choice but to comply. The weight of his presence pressed against her like an invisible force, suffocating yet intoxicating. She told herself it didn't matter, that he didn't matter. But one evening, as her hands moved across his shoulders, her frustration finally spilled over. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "does your body ache every single day? I swear you should qualify for a frequent massage card by now." She rolled her eyes before adding, "Maybe you can bring your wife next time, then I can massage both of you." A sharp silence followed. Then, his voice, low and deliberate, "My wife is missing me right now." Her hands stilled. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Huh?" He turned his head slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "I don't have a wife, Clara." Her breath caught in her throat. Ahead she could react, he sat up and the towel draped over his hips slipped, just enough to expose the toned expanse of his back. Clara's eyes widened and she spun around instinctively, heart hammering in her chest. "What are you doing, sir?" she said, her voice sharper than intended. "We're not finished." Behind her, she heard the soft exhale of his breath, felt the shift in the air as he moved closer. Then, before she could step away, warmth enveloped her. William wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her against him. She stiffened, her pulse going wild as he buried his face against the curve of her neck, inhaling deeply. "We're not finished at all," he murmured against her ear, his voice a slow, dangerous drawl. "You walked out on me." She gasped, body betraying her for a split second before panic kicked in. He pressed a kiss to her ear, sending shivers down her spine. Desperate, she kicked back hard, hitting his shin. "Ow!" he muttered, but the hold loosened just enough for her to escape. She whirled around, chest heaving, only to find him gripping the towel now, securing it back in place. Clara swallowed hard, steadying herself. "I didn't leave you, sir," she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "I simply ended my job with you." She straightened her spine, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "Now please, leave me alone. My life is peaceful." She wasn't sure who she was trying to convince, him or herself. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, relief flooded her when she realized she had no shift for the day. She doubted William would stay at the resort forever. And yet, as much as she wanted to believe he would eventually disappear from her life again, a bitter truth lingered in the back of her mind. He hadn't searched for her in 7 years. So why now? Why was he here? And why was he making it so damn hard to keep pretending he didn't matter? He had probably married that Isabella woman after all. It made sense. Isabella wouldn't have gone to such lengths back then if she hadn't intended to make him hers. Clara forced the thought away. It didn't matter anymore. William was in the past, and she had a new life now, one that revolved around her children. When her long-awaited day off arrived, she kept her promise and took Damien, Lucy, and Aunt Alara out for a well-deserved treat. They headed to a large shopping mall, the bright lights and endless store displays instantly catching the twins' attention. "Mom, let's eat at the place with the bumblebee," Lucy squealed excitedly, gripping Clara's right hand as they walked through the bustling food court. Behind them, Aunt Alara trailed along, a tote bag hanging from her arm. Damien, however, scowled. "I don't want the bumblebee place. I want the place with the clown. Their food is way better." Lucy scrunched her nose in disgust. "That place is ugly, Damien. The bumblebee place is prettier." Damien stomped his foot. "Mom, tell her! The clown place has the best fries!" Clara sighed, feeling the familiar tug-of-war about to escalate. "Enough, both of you," she said firmly. "We'll decide where to eat later, okay? You both did great on your exams, so we'll make sure to get what you want. But let's talk about it without fighting." That was all it took for the twins to forget their argument. They cheered, their energy renewed as they darted from one aisle to another, chattering about everything they wanted to see. Clara shook her head with a small laugh. Beside her, Aunt Elora chuckled. "They're full of life," Aunt Elora said, watching the twins bounce around like two hyperactive bunnies. Clara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. No matter how hard things got, as long as her children were happy, it was all worth it. Even if she constantly worried about money, the twins at least understood the limits. They never demanded too much. Lucy suddenly tugged on her sleeve, pointing toward a display window. "I want that pink dress with the Barbie design." Clara followed her daughter's gaze to a frilly dress hanging inside the store. She let go of Lucy's hand and took the dress off the rack, holding it up to inspect the size. Lucy's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Mom, I think it'll fit me, and I want hair clips too, so I can be extra pretty at school." Before Clara could respond, Damien yanked on her other arm, nearly making her drop the dress. "Hey, Mom, I want something too," he declared, pointing toward a nearby mannequin. Clara turned to look and immediately choked on air. Damien was pointing at novelty underwear, specifically a bright yellow pair covered in SpongeBob's grinning face. "Son," Clara coughed, trying to suppress a laugh, "that's not your size." "But I want SpongeBob boxers," Damien insisted, crossing his arms stubbornly. "And Spider-Man ones too," Lucy groaned dramatically. "Mom, tell him underwear isn't a real gift." Clara rubbed her temples, torn between amusement and exhaustion. Aunt Ilara, meanwhile, was trying very hard not to burst into laughter. It was moments like these that reminded Clara, no matter how much chaos surrounded her, her children were the brightest part of her world. Okay, we'll see," Clara said, trying to settle the argument before it escalated again. But Lucy wasn't ready to let go just yet. She tugged Clara back toward the dress section with surprising strength for someone so small. "Mom, don't go with Damien yet. Help me pick hair clips with crowns on them so I can look like a princess," she pleaded, her eyes wide with determination. Meanwhile, Damien let out an impatient huff and stomped his foot. "Mom, my SpongeBob boxers," he whined, attempting to drag her away in the opposite direction. The scene they were making wasn't going unnoticed. Several shoppers threw amused glances their way, some smiling knowingly while others looked downright annoyed. Clara felt heat rush to her cheeks. If only she could split herself in two, she could help both of them at the same time. With a sigh, she finally managed to strike a compromise. Each child would pick their items on their own, without her hovering. So they'd stop fighting for her attention. The moment she said yes, they lit up with excitement, dashing off as if they had suddenly become royalty shopping for treasures. Clara knew one thing for sure. By the end of this shopping trip, she'd be broke. Beside her, Aunt Ilara chuckled and whispered, "Ooh, having twins is exhausting. They're so lively." Clara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Yes, Aunt Ilara, but it's okay. When they grow up, I know I'll miss how energetic they are." Aunt Ilara's smile faded slightly, her tone shifting. "Don't you ever plan on telling their father about them, Clara?" The question hit like a jolt of electricity. Clara froze. For a brief moment, her mind went blank before the memories came crashing back. William, he was here, somewhere in this city. Her stomach twisted with an emotion she refused to name. No, he wouldn't stay long. He had no reason to. Clara forced a smile, one she hoped looked more confident than she felt. "It's better this way," she said quietly. "If I had told him I was pregnant back then, maybe he would have claimed them. Or maybe not. Either way, my kids and I have had a peaceful life all these years. That's all that matters." Aunt Ilara didn't argue. She simply sighed, the silence between them speaking louder than words. Just then, Lucy came skipping back, holding her chosen items against her chest, like they were the most precious things in the world. "Mom, can I add something else?" she asked hesitantly. "I know we don't have a lot of money, but..." Clara's chest tightened. Her daughter's cautious tone, the way she held back her excitement, it all made Clara's heart ache, because deep down she knew, if William were here, money wouldn't even be a problem. But Clara swallowed her emotions, forcing a reassuring smile. "We'll save up for it next time, okay?" Lucy, ever the understanding child, nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her face. Aunt Ilara gently took her by the hand. "Come on, sweetheart, let's go pay," she said, leading Lucy toward the checkout counter. Clara exhaled, feeling momentarily lighter, until she realized something. "I'll go find Damien," she said. "He's taking forever." Aunt Ilara nodded, and Clara turned, retracing her steps through the store. At first, she wasn't worried. Damien had a habit of getting distracted. Maybe he was still debating between two designs or admiring some action figures. But as she reached the aisle where she had last seen him, her heart stopped. He wasn't there. Panic shot through her like lightning. "Damien!" she called out, her voice sharp with fear. She spun around, scanning every corner of the store. Nothing, her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Damien!" she called again, louder this time, her breath quickening. Shoppers turned to glance at her, but she didn't care. She was already moving, weaving through the aisles, her hands trembling. Just as she was about to run to a security guard, she caught sight of a small figure near the end of the store. Her breath hitched. Damien. A wave of relief nearly brought her to her knees. He stood there, gripping a Spider-Man pencil case in his tiny hands. But he wasn't alone. Clara's footsteps slowed as she registered the person he was talking to. No, it couldn't be. Her chest tightened as Damien turned and pointed excitedly. "Mom!" he called. "Look, I found someone who looks just like me!" Clara's stomach dropped. Her gaze followed Damien's finger. Straight to William. He stood frozen, staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. But he wasn't alone either. Beside him, an elegantly dressed woman clutched her purse tightly, her lips slightly parted in shock. It was William's mother. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, in a whisper barely louder than a breath, William's mother said, "Oh my goodness." She turned to her son, voice unsteady. "That little boy, he's the spitting image of you at that age." Clara's world tilted. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. "Who, Mom?" Damien asked, tugging on her sleeve, his innocent eyes blinking up at her. Clara's mind spun, her carefully built walls beginning to crumble. It felt as if the entire world had frozen around them. Damien's innocent question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. "Mom." The boy had just confirmed what William's mother suspected. Before Clara could react, another voice rang out. "Mom, I'm done." Lucy Shee came skipping toward them, holding Auntie Lara's hand. But the moment her eyes landed on William, she stopped mid-step, blinking in confusion. Silence stretched between them. Then, a sharp inhale. William's mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "The girl, she's like the female version of you, William." Excitement surged in her voice as she clutched her son's arm. William's gaze flickered between the twins, his face unreadable. But beneath the surface, his emotions twisted. Confusion, shock, and a sudden, undeniable realization. Clara felt cornered. This couldn't be happening. She forced a tight-lipped smile and said hastily, "Thank you for noticing. My child was wondering. We'll be going now." Without another word, she tugged Damien away, her grip firm but gentle. Lucy followed obediently, though she kept glancing back. Aunt Lara trailed behind them, silent but alert. Clara never looked back. William stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat as he watched them disappear into the crowd. His mother's fingers tightened around his sleeve. "Son," she murmured, her voice low with realization. "That woman, she's the one Isabella attacked in the mall years ago, isn't she? I was there. I saw everything. I tried to stop Isabella when she lost control, but—" She hesitated, her gaze shifting toward where Clara had just walked away. "And those children, they look exactly like you." William's jaw clenched, his fists curled at his sides. "Did I get her pregnant? Did she hide my children from me?" His pulse pounded in his ears. His mother turned to him, her expression mirroring his own turmoil. "I'm thinking the same thing," she admitted. William's frustration boiled over, his voice low and sharp. "Clara, not only did you leave me, you took my children as well," his mother inhaled sharply. "So she's the one you love," she whispered. She studied his face carefully, and something clicked in her eyes. "The one you refused to marry Isabella for?" William's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it, because deep down, he already knew the answer. Her heart pounded. "Aunt Ilara?" she called out, her voice rising slightly. Silence. A chill ran down her spine as she hurried through the house, checking every room. The twins' backpacks were in their usual spots, but the house was eerily empty. Clara swallowed hard, her pulse racing. Just as panic threatened to take over, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She snatched it out with trembling fingers and glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice rumbled through the speaker. "Clara," her breath hitched. "William." "I have them," he said. Her blood turned cold. "You what?" she nearly screamed. "They're safe," he reassured her, though his voice held an edge. "With me. And my mother." Clara's grip on the phone tightened. "Where are they? Where is Aunt Lara?" "She's fine," William said. "I asked her to let me take the kids out for a while. She agreed, reluctantly. I told her it was time for us to talk." Clara's chest heaved as anger and fear tangled inside her. "You had no right." "I have every right," William shot back. "They're mine too, aren't they?" Her silence was answer enough. "Clara, come here, we need to talk." She wanted to refuse, to scream at him, to demand that he return her children immediately, but she also knew this was inevitable. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William gave her an address. "Come alone," he added before ending the call. Clara stood frozen for a moment, her body trembling. Then she grabbed her keys and ran out the door. William ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "Clara, you don't know the full story," he said, his voice low but firm. "Yes, Isabella was in my room that day, but nothing happened. She set it up. She wanted you to see her there." Clara shook her head, unwilling to listen. "I don't believe you. She was wearing your shirt. What else was I supposed to think?" He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "That I would never betray you," he said, eyes dark with frustration. "That I would never touch another woman when I—" He stopped himself, inhaling sharply before continuing. "She wanted to force me into marriage. She staged that scene, knowing you'd walk in, and it worked, didn't it? You ran without giving me a chance to explain." Clara's breath hitched. Had she really misunderstood everything back then? No, she couldn't afford to think that way now. "It doesn't matter anymore," she whispered, voice trembling. "Even if I was wrong, it's too late. 7 years, too late." His grip on her arm loosened slightly, but his gaze never wavered. "It's not too late, Clara," he said. "Not for us, not for them." Tears burned her eyes. "You can't just show up after all these years and decide you want to be a father," she snapped. "You had 7 years to look for me. 7 years to wonder if I was carrying your child. But you never did." William flinched. "I did," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I searched everywhere. You disappeared without a trace. I had no idea where to find you." She opened her mouth to argue, but his next words stopped her cold. "And when I finally found you," he murmured, "I discovered that I had missed 7 years of my children's lives." A heavy silence filled the room. Clara clenched her fists, torn between anger, guilt, and something dangerously close to hope. But she couldn't let herself soften. "You can't take them from me, William," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not taking them from you," he replied, stepping even closer. "But I'm not walking away, either. I won't lose them, or you, again." Her heart pounded. She had no idea how to fight him when, for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she even wanted to. "I was asleep, Clara." William's voice was raw with frustration. "I had no idea she even showed up that night. Nothing happened between us, and I never married her. She's been out of the country for years." Clara's chest ached as tears slipped down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I went to your condo that night to tell you I was pregnant." William's expression faltered, but she pushed on. "But she was there," Clara choked out, "wearing your shirt, acting like she owned the place. She told me you two were engaged. She threw me out and laughed in my face, so I never came back." Silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of lost years. William exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. His voice, when he spoke again, was lower, steadier. "That's the truth, Clara. I'm single. I never married anyone. I never even considered it." His gaze bore into hers, unwavering. "But you ran away from me, twice. Tell me, why would I chase after you if I thought you'd just leave again?" Clara couldn't breathe. The emotions flooding her were too much. Then, his voice softened, and it was somehow even more dangerous than before. "But now I know we share children," he said. "And that changes everything." She barely had time to register his words before he delivered the next blow. "I'm taking them, Clara." Panic slammed into her. "No," she gasped, instinctively trying to step back. He caught her wrist, his grip firm yet gentle. His face was so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Don't worry," he murmured. "I'm not just taking the kids." His fingers trailed up to her chin, tilting it up so their eyes locked. "I'm taking you too." And before she could fight, before she could scream, his lips crashed onto hers. The kiss was fierce, demanding, a clash of fury, desperation, and something terrifyingly familiar. Then she felt it. A sharp prick against her shoulder. Clara's eyes flew open in horror. She jerked away, gasping, her vision already swimming, her body weakened instantly, her limbs turning to lead. With her last ounce of strength, she looked at him. William was watching her, a syringe in his hand, and he was smiling. "Sleep, Clara," he murmured, catching her just as the world faded to black. Clara woke to a burst of noise, laughter, the rhythmic thumping of little feet. Her eyes fluttered open, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, high and intricately designed with elegant molding. The air smelled of something expensive, like fresh linen and polished wood. The bed beneath her felt impossibly soft, shifting slightly with movement. "Mom, Mom," she shot upright. Her twins were bouncing on the massive mattress, their giggles echoing in the spacious room. The moment they saw her awake, they squealed and rushed into her arms. "Mom, you're finally awake!" Lucy clung to her, pressing her tiny hands against Clara's cheeks. Damian grinned from ear to ear. "Dad said we'd be living here now, Mom. He bought me so many new toys." Clara's heart nearly stopped. What? Panic surged through her as she crushed them into her arms, her breath catching. She thought she had lost them. Her hands trembled as she stroked their hair, feeling the warmth of their little bodies. "Mom, are you crying?" Lucy's voice was gentle, her fingers brushing against Clara's damp cheeks. Clara quickly wiped her tears, forcing a smile as she held them close. "I'm okay, sweeties. A presence made the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She looked up. William stood leaning against the doorway, watching. Her breath hitched, fear coiled in her chest, and she instinctively tightened her hold on the children. William stepped forward, his hands raised slightly in surrender. "Clara," he said smoothly, "I'm not taking them away from you." Her pulse pounded. She darted a frantic glance around the room. Huge, luxurious, nothing like their modest home. "Then where are we?" she demanded. "Why did I lose consciousness? What did you do, Mom?" Lucy's voice was hesitant. Don't fight with Dad," she pleaded. "He's nice." Damian nodded eagerly. "We finally have a dad, Mom?" Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight, her disbelieving gaze snapped back to William. His eyes held steady, calm, but something unreadable lurked beneath them. "I told you, Clara," he said softly. "I wouldn't do anything to hurt you." His voice was maddeningly patient, as if he had all the time in the world. "Didn't you want to be a family? And then, take a look at your left hand." Dread crawled up her spine as she slowly lowered her gaze. A sparkling ring glinted on her finger. Her stomach lurched. "What?" Her voice barely came out, breathless and shaky. "Why do I have a ring?" William's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "I bought that a long time ago during my trip to Singapore," William said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something raw. Clara's breath hitched as he lifted her hand, his thumb grazing the delicate ring on her finger. "Remember when I left the country back then? That's when I picked it out. You never gave me the chance to give it to you." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "You think I want to be your mistress now that you suddenly know about the kids?" A gasp slipped from her lips as soon as the words left her mouth. "Mom, what's a mistress?" Lucy's innocent voice cut through the heavy silence. Clara stiffened. Aunt Alara appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the tension between them. "Ah, kids," she said brightly, clapping her hands together. "Let's go check out the backyard. I heard there's a big swimming pool." She didn't wait for a reply before ushering the twins out, their excited chatter fading down the hall. The moment they were alone, William took a step closer. Clara's pulse quickened. He reached for her hand again, his touch gentle yet unyielding. "Clara," he murmured, "we have children. Don't tell me you're still planning to run away." Her throat tightened. "You know I'm not married," he continued, his gaze locked onto hers. "I never married Isabella. She's been out of the country for years." She glanced down at the ring, her thoughts spiraling. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You never came after me. 7 years, William. 7. A shadow passed over his face. "I knew where you worked, the spa, the resort, but I had no idea about the kids." His voice was quiet but firm. "I stayed away because I was afraid. Afraid that if I showed up, you'd disappear again." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "But now that I know, I'm not backing down." She looked away, uncertainty swirling inside her. William took a slow breath, then leaned in, his voice low and resolute. "I'm taking my kids, Clara. And I'm taking you with me." She flinched, and he immediately softened. Not by force, he reassured her. We'll do this right. Clara, listen. He gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Will you marry me? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Not for the kids, he added, his tone raw, vulnerable. But because you love me. Tears burned in her eyes. Because, despite everything, despite the heartbreak, the misunderstandings, the years apart, she knew the truth. She had never stopped loving him. William took her trembling hand and pressed it against his chest. Do you feel that, Clara? He whispered. My heart, it's pounding, because of you. She swallowed hard, her own heart hammering in response. I've loved you for a long time, he confessed. Yes, our beginning was messy, but we don't have to let it end that way. His words wrapped around her like a lifeline, and Clara, she wasn't sure she had the strength to let go. Clara exhaled shakily, her heart pounding against her ribs. Finally, she admitted, William, I love you too. I always have. Even when we didn't have a real relationship. I fell in love with you, and it never went away. Not even once. William's eyes gleamed with relief, his grip on her tightening as if afraid she'd slip away again. He didn't hesitate. He leaned in and captured her lips in a kiss that spoke of years of longing, of regret, of an unbreakable bond that had refused to fade. Clara melted into him, her arms looping around his neck as he gently eased her down onto the bed, never once breaking contact. When his lips trailed down her neck, he whispered, I missed you so much. She barely had time to respond before he kissed her again. But then, bang! The door burst open. They froze. Standing at the threshold was Aunt Ilara, her eyes wide in horror, and peeking in from behind her were two pairs of bright, curious eyes. Mom, why is Dad on top of you? Lucy asked loudly, her little face scrunched in confusion. Clara felt her soul leave her body. Before she could even breathe, Aunt Ilara spun around and clapped her hands. All right, kids, back to the pool. They're busy making a new baby. No disturbing them. Clara choked. William smirked. The door shut with a sharp click. Her face burned with mortification. She tried to push William away, but he only chuckled and captured her lips again. Let's have a comeback moment, Clara, he murmured, his fingers tracing slow, tantalizing patterns along her skin. I miss your touch. Despite herself, Clara felt her heart betray her. She let go, and in that moment, everything changed. The twins accepted William immediately, as if he had never been absent from their lives. And William, in turn, wasted no time making up for lost years. He introduced Clara and the kids to his entire family, who welcomed them with open arms, especially his mother, who had tears in her eyes as she hugged her newfound grandchildren. Aunt Ilara, much to Clara's surprise, got along with William's mother effortlessly, the two women bonding over their shared excitement for the twins' future. Clara had never imagined her life would take this turn, but somehow fate had given them a second chance to love and be loved. 1 year later, they all lived under one roof, a family complete. William married Clara in an intimate church ceremony, where he made sure the twins stood beside them, bearing witness to the moment their parents finally became one. He had their last names changed, because until then, they had only carried Clara's. It was a new beginning. One afternoon, while enjoying a family picnic at the park, Lucy grinned up at them, her tiny fingers still sticky from cake frosting. Mom, Dad, the wedding cake was so good, she exclaimed, licking her fingers. I want a cake like that for my birthday, but bigger, Damien, sitting beside her, groaned. Lucy, you always want everything huge. Because I deserve it, she shot back, hands on her hips. Clara laughed, watching as William reached over to playfully ruffle Damien's hair before pulling Lucy onto his lap. You'll get your cake, princess, William promised with a smile. As Clara watched them, warmth spread through her chest. A year ago, she had thought love had slipped through her fingers. Now, she had everything she had ever dreamed of. And more. Lucy clung to William's neck while he laughed, spinning her around before setting her back down. Their honeymoon could wait. Right now, all that mattered was cherishing the little moments as a family. A week after their wedding, they found themselves at the park, basking in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. Damien ran across the grass, a toy car trailing behind him on a string he had cleverly tied to his wrist. Lucy chased after him, her laughter ringing through the open air as they weaved between the trees. Clara and William sat together on a picnic mat, fingers intertwined, their eyes never leaving their children. The sight of them playing so freely, so joyfully, filled Clara's heart with warmth. Then she felt William's gaze shift toward her. His smile had softened, his expression turning thoughtful. "What is it?" she asked, tilting her head. He exhaled, his voice low but full of quiet emotion. "I'm happy," he admitted. "Really happy." Clara's eyes glowed, her heart swelling. "I know," she whispered. "Me too. You've given me a life I never thought I'd have. One that's whole, filled with love and joy." William's grin returned, playful and full of mischief. "Then give me a massage when we get home," he teased, pressing a light kiss to the back of her hand. "I miss your magic touch." Clara arched a brow. "What kind of massage are you asking for?" she challenged, a smirk tugging at her lips. He chuckled, sliding an arm around her waist. "The real thing. A back massage. Though, if you have other ideas, I won't complain." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "I'll do it as soon as we get home," he promised. Satisfied, William kissed her cheek, his lips lingering just a moment longer. Together, they sat in peaceful silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and violet, while the park lights flickered on, tiny beacons illuminating the start of their forever. Life has a funny way of bringing people back together when they're meant to be. Clara and William's journey wasn't perfect. It was filled with misunderstandings, lost time, and painful choices. But in the end, love, patience, and forgiveness helped them find their way back to each other. This story reminds us that sometimes the past doesn't have to define our future. Mistakes can be mended, and second chances are real if we have the courage to take them. Family isn't just about being together, it's about choosing each other day after day. So if there's someone in your life you've been afraid to reach out to, maybe it's time to take that first step. You never know, it could lead to a brand new beginning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. And let us know in the comments, do you believe in second chances?